So we're going to actually move from the broader questions to, there have been a good number of re-entry questions, and some of which are for Dick Wan. So if you could join us up front for a second.
Come back.
You know, we started with the personal, and we're going to move back, at least for a second, to the personal, because there are a handful of folks that are interested in the practical aspects of life when you're re-entering. So the one question is this: at what point in your life would you have a most welcome intervention of the kind the re-entry program gave you? This is actually related to the prevention moment. You're now getting a lot of support from what Paul described about your background. You didn't have a lot of support before you entered into the system. So when do you think these sorts of programs might have been even more impactful, even perhaps in terms of redirecting your life in an earlier stage?
Well, for me, when I was younger, I was heavily involved in sports. So, like after I would go to the park or the local gym and indulge in basketball, football, whatever the activity that is provided, you know, the gym doesn't stay open all night. So when I leave, it's still 7, 8 o'clock, and I'm, you know, 12, 13, 14 years old. And at that type of time, maybe I'm 7th grade, 8th grade, and full of energy. So if there was something, a program, not necessarily an after school program, but it could be on the weekends. It can be, when you have idle time, it's the time where you're most vulnerable and you're most prone to do something that you should. So if I can pinpoint one particular time, it would probably be between the age of 11 to 15. Around that time, me personally, I was very curious, naive, and I would do things that other kids or kids older would do. And I hung around older kids, but there was no quote-unquote after-school program or something around. For me, in that age bracket, 11 to 15, there was no programs that had me interested in finances or you know, things other than sports. I mean, we gravitate towards sports, but if you can grab a child's or a young guy's interest, either a female, if you can grab their interest with something other than sports, it will be a big help also.
Dick Wan, a couple of other questions, and I'll combine them. One is, can you talk a little bit about living with a record, whether or not it's for violent crime or non-violent crime? What are the difficulties of life, particularly related to housing or even getting a job?
Well, that's interesting you say that. I had a job interview, and it was a hospital, but it was just for like the stock room. It was in I can't remember. I know it was a hospital, and it was for stock room. So I went in there, had my khakis on, my shirt. We did the interview. He asked me a couple of questions. I knocked them out. But then he asked me a question. He said, "What was the last job you worked?" And the last job I worked was in prison. So I described the job. He said, "How much did you make?" I said, $3 a day. He said, "Excuse me?" And then when I said that, I said, "Damn, I messed up." So he left. Well, we finished the interview, and he asked me, he said, the clothes you have on now is fine. Khakis, your shoes, your shirt, that'll be, you know, your attire for the job. So I'm saying to myself, oh, I got a job. But when we went over the hourly rate that I made, my previous job, he left the room. When he came back, you know, he hit me with the, I'm gonna give you a call. You know, I'm gonna give you a call, just be looking out for my call. So I said, call? You just told me, you know, the clothes that I have on is fine. I'm thinking that you're gonna come in and give me a schedule or tell me come back for training. But when people hear that you have a criminal background or they read it on your resume, that's all they have to go on. They don't know you as a person. They don't know if you've changed. All they see is convicted of a crime. They may ask you what crime. Some of them ask you what crime. But they don't see the person that you are or can be, or what help you can be towards their company. They just see a criminal, and they may think, like, this guy might be stealing purses. I can't leave my car door open. I can't, I gotta watch 24/7, and they don't want a guy like that around. So it's a lot of just hardships, and you have to be mentally strong to overcome it. You can't lash out. When a guy says, okay, I'm gonna call you back, you can't say, oh, just a minute ago I had a job, you racist, this, that, and the third. You just have to take it on the chin and say, you know what, thank you, sir, for the interview, and you proceed on and you fight again. And eventually, you keep knocking, somebody's gonna open the door.
All right, Daquan, I think Cookie has a perspective on this, particularly from her experience with folks working with reentry. She can give a broader view.
As a case manager, it's the hardest thing to teach a man who's been locked up for 10, 15 years how to get past that question. The reality is that you can't lie in a job interview. The reality is that what are you going to say when you can't lie in an interview? What do you do with that space? And what we were teaching men and women in our reentry program was don't lie. You worked in a cafeteria. You served, this is one example just for time's sake, you serve 700 people lunch and dinner every day. You have major industrial cafeteria culinary experience. Speak to it. Show that you were a productive member of your own rehabilitation or habilitation. Sometimes you went into prison as a very young child. You don't know rehabilitation if you never figured out what life was in the first place. So there's one thing to create a resume that looks like you without $20 words that you can't even pronounce. There's something else about the interview. Not only just dealing with the question of were you ever incarcerated, but also walking out of that room with your head high and knowing that you represented yourself as who you are. Because they've already been beaten down and completely programmed to the opposite. So, and they know that there's 10 people out in the waiting area that don't have a criminal record that's going into interview right behind them. These reentry programs are vital, they're necessary, and they truly don't exist for everybody. And even the reentry programs, I challenge you to check them. Are they doing these type of things for ex-offenders? Are they producing a man that can hold his head up high? Programs like Paul is doing is, but many of them are not, and many, 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 many more are needed.
All right, now we have 20 minutes left, so we're going into an extended lightning round. All right. And so the first question is also a reentry question, but it's for Daquan, and it actually keys off a question that you, Paul, and I were discussing last week or the week before, which is about voting rights. What is the challenge what stands between you and the ballot box now that you're out?
Well, I don't actually know what stands between me and voting, but 2 weeks ago,
Hold the mic a little bit higher.
2 weeks ago, I took a course, I took a TABE test because I wanted to pursue my CDL and my personal trainer certificate, my license. So I took a TABE test and orientation class. So with that class, once you score on a TABE test, if you're scoring, exceptionally high or within the range that they accept you, they give you a call. So I took the test, and I scored pretty good. But when they called me back, she said, are you a registered voter? And I said, I don't think so. So she said, well, you're not eligible for this grant, this federal grant, because you're not a registered voter. You have to be a registered voter to receive this $4,000 grant. So I said, well, I've been going for 10 years, and before that I was going for 3 years. So I didn't take the time to vote. You know, when I was young, I didn't really think about voting, but I guess when I thought about it, I wasn't present to register or to vote. So when she said that I'm not eligible for the grant because I'm not a registered voter, it kind of threw me off. So she gave me 5 or 6 numbers to call, and she said, explain, when you call this number, explain to them why you didn't vote. So I said, okay. She said, I'm pretty sure you're gonna say you was incarcerated. I said, yes, that's my answer. She said, they have to accept your reasoning and then make a decision on whether you will grant the money or not. She said, and if they don't accept your reasoning, I'm gonna file an appeal. So I was like, all that? I mean, I just took the test, you know, I was in the orientation, I'm just, you know, I'm trying to make a living, but it's
So Daquan, it's fair to say that there's like even another set of barriers.
yes, that I don't even know how to get around it.
So then quickly on voting, I know both Cookie and Ryan have some quick interventions on that. Cookie, if you could describe sort of what the barriers are, and then Ryan, if you could talk about the legislation that's currently before the Trenton to actually, the legislation that might actually fix it if we're actually moving forward. Cookie?
I'm going to say 3 words to you, and Ryan can speak to you about this till next week, and he's an incredible national expert on voting rights. I'm going to say to
He
you...
doesn't have permission to speak until next week.
The right to vote, the registered vote, to vote, redistricting, and prison gerrymandering. We know what redistricting is. It's drawing the legislative maps for people who are going to vote. It's starting with the census. We know that. Prison gerrymandering is when I live in Whippany and I get sent to Burlington County Prison. They count me when they count the census down there. That's redistricting. These things are directly connected to voting rights, power, and very serious issues that are connected to disenfranchisement of people. But I'm going to really let Ryan take this over because this is a class or 2 all by itself.
So Ryan, just speak quickly to the legislation that is out there now.
Okay, so this is quick. Just want to provide a quick piece of context, if I might. So this issue, if there's a concrete takeaway, I would love for this to be one of them, because there really is no connection between the criminal justice system and the right to vote. It just doesn't follow that if you're convicted of any criminal infraction, you should lose your voting rights. It's just, there's really no connection. The reality is that there is no criminal justice prerogative or aim served by depriving someone of the right to vote following a criminal conviction. No one decides not to commit a crime because they fear they're going to lose their voting rights. Right? So there's just no deterrence. It's not a punishment because people don't know they're losing their voting rights until they've lost them. And even then, sometimes folks don't know. And what we know empirically is that there are states, Maine and Vermont, in the United States that don't deprive people of their voting rights ever. So in Maine and Vermont, you're convicted of a felony, you're incarcerated, you can vote there from absentee ballot. And what we've learned from those states is that voting is actually a reintegrative tool. That there's something about voting that helps people return home and actually fosters reentry because it gives people a stake in society. And it's precisely when people are in prison that they realize how important voting is, and it's then that we deprive them of the right to vote. Most Western democracies realized this some time ago. Canada, the European Union, Israel, South Africa. Most Western democracies recognize voting as a fundamental right and allow prisoners to exercise it because they know it helps to bring folks home both meaningfully and permanently. The U.S. has a pretty dark history with respect to the original operation of these laws. I just want to say very, very quickly, 10 seconds. Mississippi is a good example. So these laws came on the hills, true story, look this up, on the Civil War. These were newly freed African Americans who were gaining the franchise at never before seen rates. And southern legislatures like Mississippi adopted these laws that required the loss of voting rights, which they believed formerly enslaved people more likely to commit. So these were usually crimes of theft. So under these laws, true story, look it up, one would be deprived of their voting rights for stealing a chicken, which they believed formerly enslaved Africans would more likely to do, but not for the more robust crime of killing the chicken's owner. And today, not surprisingly, these laws have impacted 6 million people, a disproportionate number of whom were people of color. So as we approach the presidential election in November, there will be 6 million people who will be legally sidelined from this election, and many, many, many more who actually have their rights restored but just don't know it. So in New Jersey, our legislature was working on a bill called the Democracy Act. This is an important bill to watch because it seeks to modernize our voting processes and enshrine early voting and same-day registration and some of the more progressive elements. And the legislature has been discussing whether to include restoration of voting rights for people who are on probation and parole. That's who can't vote in New Jersey. So if you have been convicted of a crime and you're sentenced to probation or parole, you can't vote until you're off probation and parole. But that is something that the legislature has been considering putting in the Democracy Act. So I would encourage you concretely to look at this issue more closely and to recognize the way in which our legislature really should be thinking about not being like states that have those dark periods with respect to this practice, but really leading the nation and enfranchising folks, more like we've seen in Maine and in Vermont.
One quick thing on that. There are members of the legislature who are reluctant to support it, particularly that provision for restoring the right to vote to formerly incarcerated, because they don't want to appear soft on crime. They apparently didn't get the memo that there's a bipartisan agreement that trying to be tough on crime is not being smart on crime. And so to the extent that your voices can be added on the other side of that, that would be very, very important. Paul, there's a quick question for you. People like the reentry program. The question is, when you leave office, could it just evaporate?
So that's actually not the biggest thing I'm worried about with this program. That is because the court is now very invested in it. One of the things that we were able to do, Judge Arleo bought in very early, and now we've expanded, and there were 2 reentry courts in our federal courthouse in Newark. Judge Hammer has one, Judge Arleo has one, we've got one in Camden, we're about to open in Trenton. The judges themselves are very enthusiastic about this. That's made a real difference. The problem is not the lack of continuity, I think, and even the people in my office who are running it, who are career folks, I think are all very interested in maintaining it. The problem is scale. So we've been having this program up and running for 3 years. We've had 33, I'm looking at 33 people in the program because, as I said to the president in that room, Judge Arleo has a full-time docket as a federal judge. Kevin Egley is supervising 300 other people as a probation officer. The people who are running the program in my office, aside from Heather, are the chief of my criminal division and the chief of my civil division, who between the 2 of them supervise 120 lawyers. So the idea that we're going to be able to take every federal prisoner coming out of every person coming out of federal prison who comes back just to the Newark area is crazy, much less everybody who's coming back to New Jersey. And so that's our biggest problem. So that's why in the federal government, because we have a smaller piece of the prison population to begin with, and we don't have this opportunity for scale, we are trying to, it's our view that if we just can help 35, 40, 50 people, that can create some momentum of its own. And one of the things we're doing is the president has declared the last week in April is National Reentry Week. And one of the things, we're going to have our next reentry graduation. If anybody wants to come, it'll be at 2:30 in the afternoon at the Federal Courthouse in Newark on Friday, April 29th. I think it's actually an incredibly inspiring thing. But that morning,
And the Kiwanis told us the food is good.
the food is good. The food is always good. The food is always good. And Senator Booker and I are both going to speak, so I think and it should be quite I think quite great. But that morning at 8 o'clock, we're having an employer breakfast. We have about 5 or 6 people or companies who employ our and other people's re-entering prisoners, and they are going basically to preach the gospel to the other 50 people in the room and try to explain to them why it is worth doing exactly what Daquan just described, taking a chance. And so one of the takeaways, you've got a voting rights takeaway. One of my takeaways is if you know somebody who actually has a business in or near Newark, who might be willing to take a chance on one or two of these folks, that would be fabulous. So let us know. Heather will talk to Heather, because the truth, it's snowballs, right? And so, and for Daquan, right? He told you what it's like if you go in and you have that experience. But if he walks into a place where the person who owns the business knows that his or her best friend or competitor is actually willing to take that same chance, that actually means an awful lot.
Scale. So you're handling a relatively small number of people coming out. Cookie, could you give us a sense of the scale overall? Are the resources adequate in New Jersey to absorb and reintegrate the men and women that are being released from prison?
Not in any way at all. This is what I've been talking about. People max out in New Jersey. We're one of the top states in the country where I don't want your probation, I don't want your parole, but guess what? I haven't been out here for 10 or 15 years either, and I don't even know how to read a bus schedule. Maybe I never even held one of those cell phones, depending on how long I was in prison. I don't know how to do this. You cannot knock on a door if you're not referred into these programs. Community organizations don't have the capacity or training, quite frankly, to serve this population. Churches, synagogues, you might want to, but do you know how? Can you? Will you do it without funds? Will funds pay you? Like I said earlier, funds want you to do job training, place them in employment, make them keep the job. I have to tell you, it's kind of like drugs. If you've been addicted with drugs for 15 years, you're not going to just all of a sudden tomorrow stop. You're going to trip here and there along the way. If you've been locked up for a long time and you don't have the resources to help you get where you need to be, you're going to trip along the way. And the programs that you have that are kind of like job focused, which is really all you have at this moment, this is a major, major problem. They want you to not only get them the job, they want you to make them keep the job for 3 months, for 6 months, for 9 months. But what if you haven't worked for 10 years? What happens? You fail as a program? I mean, these are really very serious things that you have to consider. There's a lot of other things that you have to consider. Mentoring, just helping someone readjust. Where are they going to live? Do they have a safe place, a comfortable place? Do they have resources, family connections? What are all these things that we enjoy and take for granted that they don't even know exist in their world? They don't even know where to go. So this is a major, major problem. And this is what you should be focused on, among other things. But this is it. You so much have a part to play. And I'm so privileged to see all of you actually still looking at us. This is a blessing to me. Thank you so much. Give yourselves a hand, please. Thank you.
And we still have 4 minutes left. So but one quick question. This is a leading question. Cookie and Ryan, resources. Is it just a question of additional resources, or should the reentry programs that are state funded be designed to deliver more wraparound services, as Cookie was describing, or is it just a question of funding?
It's not just a question of funding. I'll use La Casa because I was there.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not.
But Paul?
But I do want to give an example. And,
Right, okay.
and here's something we've been thinking about a lot, right? So when people go in and when they come out, it's not just them, right? They have wives or husbands or girlfriends and kids. And so one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is how to provide services for that group of people. I have a former client, I won't name him, who's an Orthodox Jew from New Jersey, who went to prison for 2 years for tax evasion. His wife visited him every weekend, because they had the money for her to do that. She took the kids every weekend. He was in West Virginia, chartered plane, okay? His wife would be in the waiting room, and she would turn to the woman who was sitting next to her and say, when was the last time you saw your husband? I haven't seen him in 9 months. Well, why not? I live in upstate New York, I have 2 jobs, I got 2 kids, I can't get here. When that guy comes home, his ability to reintegrate and her ability to accept that reintegration and to reintegrate herself It's going to be ridiculously hard, and same thing for the kids. And so one of the things we've been talking about now is how do we get the kind of social services we need and therapeutic services that, honestly, we don't have the skill set or the bandwidth to provide in the U.S. Attorney's Office, or even the probation system. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that, because if they don't have a stable place to come back, their odds of succeeding, even if they get a job, drop dramatically. So so it's not just the resource issue, and that's in the dollars.
And I would just say, this is interesting because this point kind of picks up on where we started at the top of our conversation about kind of the way in which interconnectedness, this web that binds us all, no matter where we live. And this is, I think, an important point to make about the value of human resources. And so, I lead a small nonprofit organization. Folks are incredibly talented in the building. We believe in this mission with all of our hearts. We really want to do social justice and make it meaningful, and we punch above our weight. Some of us weigh more than others, with me weighing the most, sadly. But we do need additional human resources. I'm so blessed to have the parents of one of my soon-to-be interns who has joined us in the summer to do some important work. I have a cooperating attorney, Jeff Horowitz, here. And so to the extent that you have a passion for the kind of work that we've been talking about and want to volunteer your time to assist, I promise you I could find some meaningful work for you to do. It'll keep you up at night thinking about how to effectuate change around these issues. But our website is njisj.org. Cookie's going to provide our website as well. We do need lots of resources, but we also need your expertise in joining us in this important fight.
And on that one last point, then I'm going to turn it over to Mark. One of what you've seen here is a slightly revised version of what we try to do in communities. We try to have conversations. We try to connect. The most powerful moments, at least this evening, for me, we're seeing the very palpable connection between Daquan and Paul. And they both inspired each other to think differently about different sets of problems. When we first met, after Garner, and the head of the NAACP approached me and others and said, we need to do something different. You can't expect a different result if we keep doing things the same way. We keep shouting at each other, either across rooms, across barricades, or across the internet. The work of justice is actually close-in work. And what we try to do with New Jersey Communities Forward is to bring people close in. We have a huge need for people who are willing to be trained and act as facilitators. We have had sessions in Jersey City, in Newark, in Montclair, in Trenton. We are slated to go to Camden. We were in Atlantic City twice. We want to draw our facilitators from all of the people in New Jersey, not just one given population. Because a conversation with a facilitator who's of a different background can actually free up space for people to take a risk and ask a question that they might consider less than artful or dumb. We need to take these risks. So if there are folks that either have a background in facilitation or are willing to be board the law and are willing to play a role of someone who helps others listen, we need you, and we need many of you. We have trained 70 people so far. We've had between Aretha Onatiri in the back is our lead person. Aretha, wave your hand. She's the lead coordinator for New Jersey Communities Forward. And I think at current levels, we probably had conversations with 900 people around the state. But our facilitators then go back to their communities and we're building additional social capital. So that's another area where we could depend, we would love to be able to depend on you and to join us in this movement. It's around civil conversations. It's around hard issues sometimes, but we have a host of hard issues. And if we can take these tools that we're learning in some of the hardest spaces, which is around race and law enforcement, and apply them to issues like, I don't know, whether or not we can get a tunnel built. There are rooms for us to have many more civil conversations, and this would be part of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank the panelists. And also, I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight. Actually, my closing remarks are going to be very us our next steps and our action steps, which is there are many organizations to volunteer, be it within the Community Relations Committee. We're going to be partnering with the various organizations and others. So if you'd like to be involved with us within CRC or with some of these organizations, please let us know tonight or tomorrow. I hope you left your name and your emails and contact information with us, and we'll send you all the information. So on that note, thank you very much again.